Okay. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this event titled Space and Africa Developments and Cooperation. My name is Tyler Way. I'm a second year, soon to be graduated student, 3 weeks, with the Space Policy Institute here at George Washington University's Elliott School of International Affairs. So I put together this panel because in my first few short years of experience in the Space Policy Institute, or in the space policy community, I've come to find a lack of knowledge in the United States about space programs and projects in countries outside of North America and Europe, especially in Africa. I'm hoping that by engaging this conversation, we can help spread the word about some awesome developments happening in Africa and maybe point to some great opportunities for partnership between the United States and Africa. Before I introduce today's panelists, I just wanted to let the audience know that you can submit questions throughout the event, and I will ask them as we go along. There's a little QA function down at the bottom of your screens. Go ahead and use that. And I would also like to say a quick thank you to Scott Pace, who is not here, I believe, and Christine Gilbert, who is here, of the Space Policy Institute, for helping me make this event happen and encouraging me to pursue it in the first place. So we're going to go ahead and introduce the panelists alphabetically, which is the order they'll be giving their introductory remarks. I wrote all this down because these people are way too accomplished for me to memorize what they've done. So first we have Dr. Timiebi Aganaba. She is an assistant professor at the School for the Future of Innovation and Society, with a courtesy appointment at the Sandra Day O'Connor College of Law at the Arizona State University in the United States. She is currently on the advisory board for the Space Generation Advisory Council, supporting the UN program on space applications. And in the past, she spent time at the Nigerian National Space Research and Development Agency, where she spent a year in the Legal Affairs and International Cooperation Department. Timothy has represented Nigeria at the UN as a next generation aviation professional at the International Civil Aviation Organization Model Council in Montreal, and at the legal subcommittee of the Committee on the Peaceful Uses of Outer Space in Vienna. Next up, we have Judd Devermont. Judd is the director of the Africa program at the Center for Strategic and International Studies. Prior to joining CSIS, he served as the National Intelligence Officer for Africa from 2015 to 2018. In this position, he led the U.S. intelligence community's analytic efforts on sub-Saharan African issues and served as the Director of National Intelligence personal representative at interagency policy meetings. He was the Central Intelligence Agency's senior political analyst on sub-Saharan Africa. Mr. Devermont has also served as the National Security Council's director for Somalia, Nigeria, the Sahel, and the African Union. And in this role, he contributed to the U.S. strategy towards sub-Saharan Africa, signed by President Obama in 2012, and managed the process that resulted in the U.S. recognition of the Somali government for the first time since 1991. Mr. Devermont has spent 2 years abroad working at the U.S. Embassy in Abuja, Nigeria. And on top of all of that, he's also a lecturer at the Elliott School, where he co-teaches a class on U.S. intelligence analysis on sub-Saharan Africa. Up next, we have Mike Gold. Mike is the Executive Vice President for the Civil Space and External Affairs at Redwire Space. In this capacity, Mike supports the company's business development efforts, as well as government and media relations. Prior to joining Redwire, Mr. Gold was NASA's Associate Administrator for Space Policy and Partnerships, and he also served as Acting Associate Administrator for the Office of International and Interagency Relations. Before joining NASA, Gold was Vice President of Civil Space at Maxar Technologies and General Counsel for the company's Radiant Solutions business unit. Gold also spent 13 years at Bigelow Aerospace, where he established the company's Washington office, oversaw the launches of the Genesis 1 and 2 spacecraft, and was recipient of the NASA Group Achievement Award for his role in the development and deployment of the Bigelow Expandable Activity Module, BEAM. On the International Space Station, Gold graduated from the University of Pennsylvania Law School and is admitted to practice law at District of Columbia and the state of New York. And last but not least, we have Dr. Val Mansumi. As of January 2017, Val has been appointed as Chief Executive Officer of SANSA, the South African National Space Agency. As CEO, he is responsible for the development and implementation of appropriate strategies for the agency and developing and maintaining effective management teams and the management of processes that enable the agency and the local space sector to function optimally. He is currently a member of the South African Council for Space Affairs and is Vice President of the International Astronautical Conference for developing countries and emerging nations. He has also been recently inducted as an academician academician, that I've never used that word in casual conversation before, of the International Academy of Astronautics. He has also chaired the African Union Space Working Group, which was tasked with the development of the African space policy and the African space strategy. That was approved by the African Union heads of state in 2016. These instruments have now laid the foundation for the African space program. So we would like to have each of the panelists do a brief 10-minute introduction, some remarks to get our conversation going. Dr. Timiebi Aganaba, would you like to start us off?
Sure, thank you so much. It is my pleasure to be here with such a esteemed panel. I'm here to learn more, just like you, Tyler. I've been interested in space in Africa since 14 years ago when I started my career at the Nigerian Space Agency in Legal Affairs and International Cooperation. You know, I was young, in my early 20s. I didn't really know anything about space, and the department was newly set up because Nigeria was developing its partnerships. And at that time, the main partnerships were the British and the Chinese. And it was a really interesting experience because I think coming at space from a developing country perspective really makes you come down to what exactly is the benefit of this? Because of course, the big question that everybody would ask me every day is, we don't even have electricity supply that is constant, and you're talking about going to space. And so that was a very interesting experience to have my introduction into space. And then when I left Nigeria, I went to the International Space University because I thought that that would be the best place to get a, transdisciplinary perspective as to space. And that was where I found out I was some kind of unicorn. I didn't realize that there weren't that many people from developing countries. There weren't many people from Africa. I mean, this was 14 years ago, right? And, and I'm a lawyer as well. So I was some kind of unicorn, and I'm also British and Canadian. So, people were like, we've never met anyone like you. And that's when I really realized that my place in this conversation was really to talk about how does space benefit developing countries, especially Africa, and that experience of working at the Space Agency on international partnerships was very interesting because, I think I'm one of the few people that is no longer at the Space Agency, so I can talk quite freely. And I think in those beginning stages, those international partnerships did not benefit us because it is now, 14 years later, 20 years after those programs. And I don't really think, the general public would probably still say they haven't seen the benefits of that. So the reason I'm interested in this conversation today is because since I moved to America 3 years ago, I came from Canada, I started saying, well, the interesting thing is, for once, America is not the bad guy because they just haven't been around, and so it's a clear opportunity that if America can learn about the past experiences that these African countries have had with international cooperation, and knowing how, sorry, I have noise in the background, and knowing how great a service provider America is, there's a really great opportunity here for African countries and American entities to come together. Yes, we have, Professor Dr. Val here from South Africa, and we all hear about South Africa and Nigeria and all this, but for me, my best friends in the region are these emerging countries like Rwanda, Angola. They are doing such dynamic things. The Rwandan Space Agency, they're all under 40, so they're all like my age, really dynamic, trying to build their strategy up around, this whole startup culture and things like that. And so it's just so exciting and dynamic seeing what's going on in the region. As you said, I'm on the advisory board of Space Generation Advisory Council, which is the youth advocacy group. And I'm so active there because those young people are so dynamic. The African youth, we just held a workshop in Ghana that they had to go through all this during the COVID, but the enthusiasm is just huge. And because I'm a professor in America, I get students reaching out to me all the time saying, how can we work together? We've been trying to get into PhD programs, and from the technical side, it's really, really complicated, especially because of ITAR restrictions, etc. But what I'm really excited about right now is, I don't know if you guys saw, basically a couple of weeks ago, NASA came out with an RFI, a request for information, about how they can start working with developing countries and emerging nations on the technical side. So they recognize that there's been a lot of collaboration with respect to, say, citizen science and digital analytics and things like that, but clearly there hasn't been collaboration on the technical, flight stuff. And so this RFI is basically asking people, what should NASA be doing? So I'm working on that with the Nigerian Space Agency and with the Rwandans and some people from the African Union to really see how can we provide this information to NASA that will really help them understand how can you benefit from collaborating. And I think it's a two-way thing. It's definitely a two-way thing, because as an African, I know how talented our people are. So it's a two-way street, because so figuring out what is it that we can do that is also beneficial, in the relationship is also going to be truly important, because it's no longer about giving me something for nothing, right? Everyone has something to bring to the table. And I think that's what I'm excited about, this youthful population. They really want to work. We've been involved in the space game for long enough to know that the way we've been doing it wasn't working. And I think South Africa is really inspirational in all the stuff that they're doing with their startup culture and things like that. Nigeria needs to do a little bit more of that. I think in Nigeria, we're still a bit conservative. And I always say to people, from the legal standpoint, states are internationally responsible and liable for the space activities of their citizens. So they can be conservative, right? But they just have to be more encouraging, etc., because the landscape is changing. I didn't know I was going to go on for this long, so I'll stop right there. Thank you so much, Tyler.
Of course, that was a great introduction. I took some notes because I'm very excited to talk about a lot of those things. Judd, would you like to go next? Give a brief remark.
Yeah, sure. Well, thanks to GW's Space Policy Institute, and of course, Tyler, for having me here. I'm just going to start with the truth that many people, particularly US policymakers, when they think of space in Africa, they see it as, a foolish venture, right? A vanity project at best, a corruption scheme at worst. And they wonder, exactly like Timmy just said, aren't there better uses of our money? Shouldn't we be focused on development or economics or security needs? But I think there's a really straightforward argument on why space programs, if done right, really make sense for African countries and why the United States should get in the game. By the way, we are doing a very similar event next week at CSIS, which has to mean something, right? 2 weeks, 2 events on space. Something's in the water here in Washington, D.C., or at least virtually on Zoom in Washington, D.C. Anyway, here's my pitch just really quickly. First, I think space programs and space industries really can boost growth and employment in sectors like telecommunications, navigation, and Earth observation. These systems can help address real challenges from imperfect markets, climate change, scarce resources, and health. Second, innovation around satellite technology has dropped the prices of these devices. And I think this is the counter narrative that we have to sort of push out, that it's actually very viable for low-income countries in Africa to design, manufacture these small satellites. It's actually why I became a convert to this topic, is because what I learned is that it's actually less expensive to launch and maintain a satellite than it is necessarily to purchase imagery and services from other commercial vendors or from foreign governments. So it's actually that it makes sense financially. Third, I think, and I always talk from a US government perspective because I was formerly US government, I think the United States could be a much bigger player in Africa's space industry, projected to grow to $10 billion over the next 5 years. This is a real opportunity for the United States, which, by the way, only does $33 billion of trade with sub-Saharan Africa. At least that's what they did in 2020. Even if we took aside the pandemic, it was only at about 40 billion in 2019. So a $10 billion industry is a very big deal when it comes to US-Africa trade. Right now, I think the company that gets that most is SpaceX, which has invested in launch satellites in Ghana, in Kenya, Nigeria, and South Africa. I think other companies where we are world-class leaders should look into this. And of course, I wouldn't be representing CSIS if I didn't talk about some of the geopolitical risks. And I do think there are some if the United States cedes the field to China and Russia. China uses these sales certainly to bolster their relationships around the world, lead the space community. There's a lot of concern, or there's some concern, I should say, with what China has, this diameter dish that they built in Swakopmund, and whether that could be used for the PLA for cyberspace networking objectives. Russia claims, I don't know if it's true, that they're negotiating with African countries to deploy their global navigation satellite system and ground stations across the region. So some things that the US government and the US people should be thinking about, as well as African partners. And then finally, I think Africa plays a huge role in terms of space norms. There are Africans in leadership positions in the UN General Assembly's First Committee, which oversees disarmament issues. There are African leadership, actually the chair of the Fourth Committee right now, which looks at international cooperation in space. And there's often been African leadership in the UN's Committee on the Peaceful Uses of Outer Space. It's an ad hoc committee. And I think there are opportunities to look at spaceports in Africa. There's only really one spaceport in Africa, which is now defunct, and that's in Kenya. And the reason why NASA and Italian University did that is because of its location, right? 2.9 degrees south of the equator, openness to the east. It was viewed as a very strategic location. So I guess I'm going to close, Tyler, with saying don't sleep on African space programs, right? There's real opportunities here for development and economic advancement, and that's for both African countries and for US commercial communities. And we need to be thinking about these geopolitical implications. I think the door is open. We just have to, as a US company, US country, companies, government, just step across the threshold. So I'll end there.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking too. You know, it's really exciting seeing where everything's going and seeing the possibilities of what can happen next. Okay, Mike, you're up next. You want to give a brief introduction? I'm going to go ahead and share your slides for you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Tyler, and really appreciate you and the Space Policy Institute getting the ball rolling relative to the importance of space in Africa. It's so critical. And you know, I haven't heard anyone describe the relationship as foolish, but if anyone told me it was foolish, I would say it's not foolish, it's the future. This is absolutely the direction that we must move in. And this new era of public-private partnerships is transforming the space industry and opening up opportunities for international collaboration in ways that we never saw or even imagined before. And what I'd like to do is talk a little bit about the Artemis program, which is the manifestation of public-private partnerships, where Africa can, and I hope will fit in, and then discuss a little bit about what my company is doing in Africa right now is good evidence of where I think we can all head. And of course, you know, everything begins with the Artemis program, NASA's mission to go back to the moon. In the upper left-hand corner, you see the mighty Space Launch System, which will be the most powerful rocket ever designed by humanity. The Orion capsule below that, which will take astronauts to the moon. And the Lunar Gateway in the upper right-hand corner, where you will see substantial international contributions to the International Habitat, the IHAB, which is not an Apple product, the refueling element, Esprit, again, both being contributed by Europe, robotic arms from Canada. The Japanese will be providing terrific subsystem support on the habitation units and potentially bringing cargo to the International Space Station. And with Japan, Canada, Europe, you see traditional countries that have been partners with NASA in the past. What we need to do is broaden that out to bring new views, new countries, new capabilities to the table in international space exploration. And even beyond countries, you have companies. And if you look at the bottom right-hand portion of the screen, that's actually our deployable space systems unit that has the IROSA solar arrays, the giant arrays that will go on to Gateway. So you see with Artemis, incredible opportunities for not only international, but public-private participation. Next slide, please. And if I were to sum up Artemis in a word, that word would be diversity. That as you look at the Apollo missions, it was obviously a very homogeneous group of astronauts. Now, NASA has the most diverse astronaut corps in the agency's history. And the very name Artemis is the twin sister of Apollo, signifying that we're going to have the first woman, and as the Biden administration announced, the first person of color on the moon. So now we all go back. And that's not just diversity in Americans, but diversity in countries. That Apollo was a mission run primarily by and for America. Now with Artemis, NASA in the world will have the largest, broadest, most diverse human space exploration global coalition in history. So now there are all kinds of opportunities for other nations and even companies in other nations to participate. And then you've got diversity of organizations. As I described before, now you've got public-private partnerships, private sector companies participating. During the Apollo era, there really wasn't a private sector, at least as we know it today, to be able to participate. And Judd had mentioned SpaceX, which just won a contract to deliver astronauts to the surface of the moon. You see below on the screen here, there were a couple of other companies that had made proposals, Blue Origin and the National Team and Dynetics, which hopefully maybe will participate in the future as well. But we're opening up an incredible diverse program here at NASA and throughout the global commercial space industry to allow everyone to participate in this journey back to the moon. Next slide, please. And the vehicle with which to do this, and Judd mentioned the importance of norms of behavior, are the Artemis Accords, which were a multilateral development with the countries that you see listed here. It was 8 different nations that initially signed the Accords. And the Accords are the vehicle to, again, build this broad international partnership and ensure that as humanity goes back to the moon, develops the moon, that we do so in a fashion that's peaceful, that's transparent, and ensures that all of humanity can enjoy a free and safe future in the moon. And you see the principles of the Accords listed out here that again, is grounded in the Outer Space Treaty, the Registration Convention, and other international agreements, that we want all peaceful purposes to occur for anyone who joins the Artemis program, that they must be doing peaceful purposes and transparency, that everyone needs to understand what people are doing, what countries are operating on, what the companies are doing. We have so much conflict here on Earth due to misperceptions and confusion, and transparency is the most powerful tool that we have to combat that. Interoperability, if we want to have global cooperation and even business cooperation, interoperable systems are key for that. We need to rescue any astronauts that are in need of assistance. Registration is vital, again, to enhance safety and prevent conflict. The release of scientific data, something that's so important that globally we all need to agree to release scientific data in a full, free, and open fashion. That way the entire world can enjoy these journeys to new destinations like the moon and Mars. We should protect our heritage on the moon, just like we do here on Earth with museums or historic sites. Space resources. Another difference between Artemis and Apollo is, while we all appreciate the Apollo program, the problem was it ended. Now, as we go back to the moon, we need to go there to stay, and being able to leverage resources in situ is going to be critical to allow for sustainable and safe operations. And then we come to orbital debris. Humanity needs to do better in space than we have here on Earth on so many levels. And obviously, we haven't really addressed the orbital debris problem, which is a crisis level, I believe, right now here on Earth. So let's not carry that forward as we go to the moon, as we go to Mars. For any country that joins the Artemis program, we're asking to have a plan for orbital debris disposal. So 9 countries have now signed the Accords. There was a negotiation with original 8, which were nations that were either already part of the Artemis program or had proposals to join. Then Ukraine signed up, making it 9. And I hope that NASA is moving forward to add additional countries. Senator Nelson indicated his support just in his hearing, the new NASA administrator yesterday. And I certainly hope that there's a focus on African countries coming in, because Africa has such an important role to play in the future of space. Next slide, please. Those were the nations that signed the Accords. And Timiebi talked about the importance of what Africa can contribute and not just a giveaway, et cetera. And that's certainly the case. Again, while I think everyone treasures the relationship that the US has had with Canada, with Japan, with Europe, new entrants, there's a proliferation of so many new space agencies now in the world today that we've never seen before. The United Arab Emirates, which recently sent the HOPE mission, the first from the Middle East, the first satellite to go to a new planet. Luxembourg, Australia, the dynamism and the diversity of views is so important to be successful. Space is a harsh environment. Space is so hard that it takes all of us, and it's going to take incredible problem solving because the challenges are so difficult. And that diversity of views, diversity of people is how we're going to overcome the incredible challenges that we have in space. And needless to say, the energy, the thought, the intellectual capacity that we have in Africa is going to be a huge part of NASA's and humanity's success in space. Next slide, please. Again, the purpose of the norms of behavior, as Judd will tell you, is ultimately, though, to prevent conflict, that we need to set up norms now so that everything remains peaceful and we have a future in space that all of humanity can enjoy. I'm a bit of a Star Trek fan, as you can tell from this slide, and I want our future in space to be more Star Trek and less Star Wars. Next slide, please. And then we come to the private sector. And as you said, I recently left NASA to join Redwire Space. You know, we're developing and are a global leader in terms of on-orbit manufacturing, in-space manufacturing. We've got engineering design capabilities, data design and sharing capabilities. And if anyone thinks that, you know, we're starting to get to the end or there's a bubble in commercial space, we haven't even begun. We're looking at an era where you have satellites that can literally build themselves in orbit, where we're going to generate through in-space manufacturing stem cells, treatments for disease, agricultural technologies that will allow us to have deserts bloom. We are just at the beginning of this amazing era. And I'm so proud to be a part of Redwire that is looking to create this for the benefit of not only the US, but the world. And if we go to the next slide, I'd like to talk a little bit about what we're doing in Africa as well. This is the locations that we have with Redwire that are throughout the United States. And particularly, I'd like to talk about our Oakman business unit that is doing some terrific activities in Africa. Next slide, please. And specifically with this new commercial space revolution, it's allowing companies and countries without a lot of investment, without a huge amount of capital, to not only play in the space field, but to be innovators and leaders in the space field. And Africa represents a gigantic untapped potential for intellectual capacity, for creativity. And one of the things that Redwire and Oakman has been doing is we have a product called Acorn, which allows you to simulate space components as part of a satellite or even simulate a mission. And we're working with New Space Systems in South Africa to not only test virtually these systems, but then prove out the capabilities and allow you to sell into the market. That Acorn also lists out to companies where you can buy components from. So it both allows you to test and allows you to sell into the global marketplace. And to get back to Timbe's question, how do you benefit? How does Africa gain from this? Jobs, employment, creativity, innovation, which again will transform fields as diverse as biomedicine to agriculture to aerospace capabilities and allow us to combat global threats like climate change. And frankly, the COVID environment has only accelerated all of this. If you look at our Acorn product, for example, you know, we were running all of this virtually with New Space Systems and other entities in Africa, where we were doing, for example, a global collaborative effort, looking at the concept of operations for satellites, proving out parts. You know, this allows numerous new nations, new people to be involved due to these virtual capabilities, and then to prove it virtually using, you know, systems like Acorn, and then sell into the global system, which we're so proud of and so eager to be able to work with entities throughout the world, and particularly Africa. I also would be remiss if I didn't give a shout out for the first IAA African Symposium on small satellites. We're very much looking forward to participating in that. And again, it's yet another example of how Africa not only has a role to play, but a leading role to play as we move forward in this commercial revolution that is enabling all of humanity to participate and gain from the benefits of space. And with that, back to you, Tyler.
Awesome. Thank you very much. That was really interesting. I'm very excited to talk about it. Val, would you like to bring us up at the end here? I'll go ahead and share your slides.
Okay, great. Now, thanks, Stella, for the participation. I'm quite excited to be here. I'm going to take a slightly different tact or approach in terms of this narrative. I'm going to front it from a policy perspective and maybe land up in terms of how we create the sort of landscape in terms of how we could take the development and collaboration further. So first of all, just in terms of, out of the way, sorry. In terms of the approach, I'll just speak about the why space in Africa, a little bit of the what in terms of the policy and some of the more recent developments happening in Africa, and then maybe land up in terms of the how, in terms of the framing. So just from a spatial perspective, and I'm looking specifically, if you look at it from an African perspective, you know, the socioeconomic development is quite critical for Africa. And if you look at it from a land surface point of view, let alone the ocean's economy, Africa covers 20% of the Earth's land surface, and 50% of your population actually sits in Africa. So the question, if you look at the land mass, if you put China, US, India, Europe, Argentina, and New Zealand together, that comes to just over 30.2 million square kilometers. But if you look at Africa alone, it's 30.3 million square kilometers. So Africa kind of just puts all of those countries and regions. So if you're looking at the environmental issues as an example, the scale of what we're dealing with in Africa is quite significant. And then if you look at it from an African Union perspective, we have these 8 different commissions within the African Union. And what I've done here is just kind of focus on the strategic objectives of each of those commissions. And I've put a tick box in terms of which objective would actually require the space applications, products, and services. And the outcome of that is that of the 40 objectives that you have, 35 of those actually require the use of space applications. So for the work of the African Union, there's a 90% reliance on space applications. And just going back, sorry, in terms of the priorities for the African continent, when we sat down as an African Union Space Working Group, we started to identify those key priority areas. And so I'm not going to go through all of them in the interest of time. I'm just going to run through. But one point I need to make with regards to the African Union Commission, that 60% of the budget in the African Union Commission is spent on peace and security. And that's a huge issue from a governance perspective on the African continent that we need to crack. And then an even bigger challenge is if you look at how much African countries are spending or what they're producing in terms of the knowledge production pipeline. This was a study done in 2016, 2017 by the OECD in terms of the space economy at a glance. And you'll see that in terms of the budgets actually spent for space programs, the South Africa is, I think, 23rd. And in terms of knowledge production, in terms of research articles produced in journals and patents and so on, we rank 30th in the world. And then if you look at it from an African perspective, that's even more worrying, given the spatial context that I just presented in terms of the scale of what we're dealing on the African continent. So funding is a big issue, and the political backing for space programs in the African continent needs to be beefed up as well. So in 2013, we started a process with the African Union heads of state where there was a resolution passed to set up a working group and then go and look and establish an African space policy and an African space strategy. So that work has completed around about 2015. So it essentially took us 2 years to craft those 2 instruments. And then in 2016, January, those 2 policy and strategy instruments was actually approved by the 55 heads of state in the African continent. And that essentially sets up the African space agenda, which I think is very key in terms of understanding the nuancing for an African space program and how one can intersect in terms of the development and the cooperation space. So just to give you a very quick perspective in terms of the African space policy itself, there's two key goals. The one is a well-coordinated, integrated African space program. And that speaks to the African Union vision, which is around an integrated, prosperous, peaceful Africa, and where Africa is actually a global player. But the second element is to develop a regulatory framework that supports an African space program that ensures Africa is a responsible and peaceful use of outer space. And this comes back to what I think Mike spoke earlier on around the space debris issue. How do we as an African continent ensure that we play our role in terms of the global space endeavors? And so there's just 6 policy objectives that we identified that we need to push the boundaries on from an African space program, addressing the user needs. That's the departure point for a successful African space program. Accessing space services, so access to space becomes very key. Developing the regional market, adopting good governance, coordinating the African space arena, and then intra-Africa and international cooperation. I'm not going to go into details around these policy perspectives. They're quite loaded in themselves, but I just want to sift out 3 very high-level issues that's very important for consideration in this conversation. The first is building the endogenous capability in Africa so that we have the technical capabilities, then and second, that we're an intelligent user of space products and services, and obviously from the technology development perspective. The second element is that the funding from an African space program, in terms of the policy, has to come from Africa so that we can set the agenda that Africa needs to pursue, rather than it being influenced from the outside. And then the African space program, one of the key tenets is for Africa, by Africa. So it must have a heavy involvement from the African continent. Just in terms of development, in terms of what's happening, I think the last count, there was about 20 space agencies, some fairly new. 5, I think, are fairly stable and fairly probably going back to more than a decade or so. But there's quite a number of new entrants coming through. So you'll see there's a proliferation of space programs coming through in the African continent. And that's purely because of the recognition and awareness of what space, the role space has to play in socioeconomic development. And some key developments more recently, and this comes from a report published by Space in Africa. So what they've figured out in the last year is that demand for space data is increasing exponentially, and over $4 billion has been spent on satellite development to date. But if you look at the last year alone, in 2019, the spend in Africa was about $250 million. In this year, the last year in 2020, that was about $490 million. So there's almost a doubling of the space budgets in Africa. And then also, if you look at the satellites launched to date, which is about 41, but the projection is that if you extend to 2024, you're looking at about 110 satellites to be launched still. So what are the key drivers for collaboration and development? So the increasing number of satellite projects is obviously a good anchor point in terms of where you could see collaboration happening. The expansive space industry landscape, and I think, again, Mike presented some of the industry players in the African continent. And there's also some policy changes, which is also seeing a number of African space agencies emerging. Then space for sustainable development is very critical. The SDGs and also the Agenda 2063, which is a core policy document for the African continent. And there's also, I think what's central to this conversation is rising foreign interest in Africa. So who takes the bigger chunk in terms of partnerships in Africa? And that's obviously leads into today's conversation. So just to land up in terms of how we can front this conversation, you have to segment. There's emerging nations, just starting off the starting block. There's developing nations like South Africa and Nigeria, which are sort of geared on that trajectory towards a more mature space program. And then you have the developed nations like the US. So how do you juxtapose all of these different elements together in terms of how do we work together? And so one of the things we're facing on the African continent or developing countries in general is the political support, the financial resourcing, which I talked about, the technology readiness level, the human capital development, and obviously infrastructure is a key aspect of the space program. But how do you mirror that in terms of international collaboration and development? Obviously, highlighting the socioeconomic developments, benefits is quite key. So developed nations can essentially pass on the learning and the knowledge that they glean from their own development path and pass that into the political space in developing nations in terms of how that can be factored into socioeconomic development and the environment in terms of sustainability. Financial resourcing, how do you prioritize in terms of the space program? If you have limited budgets, what do you go forward with? And then on the technology transfer point of view, we can look at it with regards to technology readiness levels, human capital, knowledge transfer, infrastructure, how do we co-develop and host infrastructure in the African continent? So these are, I think, the anchor points that we can look at for cooperation. And then you have to look at it from a governance framework, the implementation cost, and also the culture and the geopolitics. I think that's where I want to land it. I think I've taken 10 seconds of my 10 minutes. Thank you, Tyler.
Thank you so much. That's really interesting. Let's go ahead and dive into some questions, and just a reminder to the audience, go ahead and submit it into the Q&A if you'd like to ask a question. I'll go through the questions and ask them to the panelists for you. Why don't we start off? I know Judd mentioned that there's a big misconception that there's not much happening in Africa, but as we had recently found out from all these presentations, there's a lot happening. Timmy, can you go over a little bit what's happening with countries that might not be, well, they might, obviously, they're obviously not, but that aren't Nigeria and South Africa? Like you had mentioned Rwanda and Angola. Like what's happening there? What are the interesting developments there?
Thank you. This was so amazing. And thanks, Val, for giving that update on what's going on. So for me, it's really interesting watching these dynamic new countries. And at least, my good friends, the Rwandans and the Angolans, hearing about their strategy development, it's really, really been focused on what are the small wins that you can gain, like the low-hanging fruit, and then how do you scale that? And what I've noticed about them that is kind of different from the Nigerians of the world is that they're less political in the development of their programs. So they're really, really very much based on, okay, we're interested in this space game. How do we get into it for benefit? And we're not interested in politics. And what I hear is that when they go to some of these meetings, you can really tell the difference between who's there for politics and has something that they're trying to hold on to, and who's there to try and make gains. So at least with the Rwandans, what they're doing is they're focusing on agriculture, and they figured out that let's start small and get one anchor client. So their anchor client was like the Ministry of Agriculture, right? And let's show what we can do. Let's show how space applications service one particular need. And then when you've been able to do that, you open it up to the private sector and start saying, you guys can work on this area. And then what they want them to do is they want them to go out of Rwanda to other countries to test things out. And if they're successful, Rwanda will now seed fund the development of their program. So it's really kind of like saying, we're going to go first and try out with this one government anchor client, and then we're going to open it up and encourage people to develop activities in this domain. And then if they've shown, some level of success, the government will now support them. So I really like this kind of whole of government approach. And they're also thinking from the education standpoint, because one of the big problems we have is that you have to leave the region to get educated. And this is the thing that I left the Nigerian Space Agency because I went to the International Space University. And my idea was to go back, but then the International Space University kind of hired me. And then from there, people kept hiring me and I never went back to Nigeria. And so I feel bad about that, but I know that I couldn't have gone back to Nigeria at that time because I didn't see particularly who was going to be my role model. And so what I like about what these new countries are doing is they're really trying to build role models. They're trying to build small wins. The Angolans are also very exciting because they've been very quiet about what they've been doing, developing capacity over 10 years. And now they have close to 100 engineers. And they're also leading the SADC region, which is the southern region on telecommunications. And so I think just going for the small wins is what's going to be really crucial, and demonstrating your capacity. I think in the Nigerian context, we started big. We were going to have a launch site. We're going to have astronauts. We're going to do all that before kind of demonstrating, well, what is the small thing that you've been successful at? So all this to say that that's historical. I'm really excited about the future for Nigeria, because we have a new director general that's just been sworn in, who is dynamic. He's so responsive. You reach out to him on LinkedIn and he replies straight away, which is something that, the past administrations were not that dynamic. I'm a social media, I'm a millennium, right? So I'm like on social media all the time. He's super responsive. So I'm really excited that, once we get over this the political side of space, and just start seeing space as an industry, as something that we really want to grow, as something that the youth can come into, we're going to see a bit of a difference from the past 20 years.
That's really awesome. Like I'm really excited to see where all this like ends up going. We have another question. Unless someone else wants to comment on the end of that. Okay, we have a question. I think this question would be great for Mike.
I might just add, if I can, Tyler,
Sure.
I just couldn't agree more with everything Timby just said. And that's where, again, I think the commercial aspect is really opening up opportunities that never existed before. Like you're saying, one CubeSat, one experiment. And if you can get that right, then you've got a pathway forward. And again, COVID and everything going virtual only accelerated all of this. And I just think that Africa, so much of this is innovation, right? And new thinking. Unfortunately, in the US and other nations, we've got a lot of baggage relative to how we think about space and what experiments can be done. Africa, and particularly some of the nations that were mentioned, just come from such a fresh new perspective. I really think that intellectual capital is going to be critical to us and all of humanity moving forward.
Awesome, yeah. Mike, I have another question for you. I know you're not at NASA anymore, but I have a question that's asking about the guest astronaut program. They're thinking about exploring that. What would you think about a lot of countries? I know Nigeria has a goal to have an astronaut by 2030. Do you know if this would be a good way to improve like geopolitical relations?
I think that there's almost no better way to unite countries and people than astronautics. That when you get above the earth, you see that we are one people, one humanity. And, we also briefly mentioned STEM and education and the need to inspire students and the need for role models. Not to keep going back, to Star Trek, but when you see people like you and who look like you on television, whether that's in science fiction or on the International Space Station, that's critical. When you see mentors who have succeeded in commercial space or in government or in policy, that allows you to move forward. And astronautics and having astronauts, there's just nothing that captures the imagination like that. Far too often we have these false dichotomies here in the US and globally, whether it's astronautics or science and human spaceflight versus robotics. The answer is always both. That when you have astronauts, that creates the energy, the excitement that then funds science programs and gets a whole generation involved in space capabilities and bridges nations. It brings us together. And again, that's why I was so proud to have worked on the Artemis Accords, which again are the beginning of the conversation. And we need to add more nations and bring everyone together. And we mentioned United Nations Committee on Peaceful Uses of Outer Space. Africa has such an important role to play there from a policy perspective, and appreciated Val's comments and help and assistance on this to create a future world and worlds in space that again are peaceful, have open scientific information, and we avoid conflict as much as possible. So both on the commercial innovation side, on the policy side, Africa has an important role to play. And the more African astronauts that we can get up there, believe me, it is just going to accelerate and act as a catalyst for all of the good things that have been described.
Yeah, that's awesome. Does anyone want to comment on that?
Can I just say something again? I don't want to capitalize everything, but we've got to be really careful in Africa with what kind of pop culture references we use. So like in America, they've been, I mean, at my university on campus, I'm seeing these kids wearing NASA t-shirts everywhere. I'm like, you guys don't even know what NASA really do. You don't even know that space is like so military and all this, but it's like, they've got the pop culture thing down. And I think we have to figure out in the African context, what works for people? Like, because I think the Star Trek, Star Wars thing, that doesn't work for Africans because we didn't really grow up on that. And when I talk to, say, people my age, I'm under 40, when I talk to them, you know, they tell me about the TV shows they used to watch. Like there's one called Super Ted that like all the people my age in Nigeria used to watch, where there was these superheroes and it was really about tech and things like that. So I'm really all for what is the unique Africa pop culture references that we're gonna use to get young people to actually believe that space is a thing. Because I think the problem is that, like, I've been in interviews where they say space is opening up, right? So we should have artists and we should have, you know, all these other people. And I say, yes, but in the African context, we still don't have like electrical engineers. We still have to focus on the basics, and people are not studying those subjects. So how do we make those things more interesting? Because I think the cultural references we have in America and the rest of the world don't really translate in Africa. So that's really what I'm trying to think about. Like, you know, and these young people that I'm talking to, you know, a lot of them already think space is cool, but those ones are very unique, you know, and I think the ones that started small, like in Nigeria, one of my mentees is 12 years old and he's the Nigerian space ambassador. And he became interested in space at 7, and there was just nothing for him. But his dad went to the space agency and sponsored them to develop an ambassador program just so that his 7-year-old kid would have something that he could aspire to. So we need a lot more of these programs and activities. And I think for Africa, which is going to be the most youthful population by 2050, it's all about the youth. That's where my emphasis is.
I mean, I just want to add that what I love about the Nigerian literature scene right now is how expansive it has become. And over the holidays, I read the Binti series by Nnedi Okorafor. So I think there's some really interesting things, you know, different than Mike's Star Wars or Star Trek, where we're seeing a lot of interesting fiction, a sci-fi that has a very large space component. So maybe we're very close to, if not already at the tipping point of, you know, African perspectives on space, at least through art.
Yeah, and if I could just comment on that too, you know, the dream drives the reality. And that's why I think actually science fiction, storytelling, popular culture has such an important piece of all of this. And that's where in Africa, you know, I completely agree that, you know, you've got Star Trek stars, et cetera, you know, a lot in the US, but, you know, having Africa present that same vision in their popular culture, in their science fiction, tell their own stories, you know, I think that's so important to inspire people, because candidly, so many people at NASA, you'll find, were inspired by popular culture and science fiction. And that's why it's important for each country, which, you know, again, is absolutely correct, is unique, you know, that we need to grow that vision and frankly, just believe that it can happen, which is why those small wins, you know, whether it's in the private sector or in government, are so important to facilitate and catalyze.
Ali, can I just latch on to this? It's quite interesting. It's maybe 3 or 4 points. The first one, the nature of the collaboration, you know, coming into Africa is going to be very critical, because what's seemingly happening in many respects is sometimes partners come in with a donor-recipient relationship or intent, and that doesn't work. You know, you start a program, and when you leave, it's dead because you haven't created the capacity on the ground. There's also a drive towards kind of capturing market share. You know, that's the prime intention. That also doesn't work, because now Africa is starting to push back. And so what we want from an African perspective is equal collaboration. We come in with our resources. It's not a donor-recipient relationship. And we want each on an equal footing. And I think that's the essence of what we're looking for from an African continent. That said, I think we also have to be mindful as to how the global space landscape is shifting and shaping. You know, Space 3.0, international collaboration, now Space 4.0 is industry. And I think that's starting to happen even in Africa. I recall probably 10 years, 15 years ago, there was probably only 2 space companies. Now there's over 20, you know, across the value chain. And so you're getting a proliferation of companies coming by. And in fact, we set up a space industry forum here to work together with the space agency. And now we're looking at an ecosystem rather than an agency focus. And that's completely changing the landscape. And this is where the industry to industry collaboration really kicks in, because that's what we're looking at promoting from our end. And just on the COVID situation, by the way, what we found out is actually our growth opportunity during this last 2 years is 15 to 20 times more than before COVID, which is very interesting because the stark reality of the importance of space became quite apparent during COVID as well. And then the last point I wanted to make, we should also be mindful that Africa is already plugged into the global space value chain. In fact, in the early 60s in the Apollo missions, South Africa was hosted one of the ground stations that supported the pre-missions for the Apollo mission. It was Australia, Goldstone in the US, and Johannesburg in South Africa. And in fact, it looks like we might be going back that way. But I just want to also indicate that every time there's a launch from the US or from ESA in French Guiana, that rocket comes over South Africa or Africa. And the control of the actual, the rocket itself, the actual projection of the satellite of the upper stage of the rocket itself happens in Africa. And that's where we provide a service where we do the ejection, switching on the satellite, in-orbit testing, and transferring it. Transfer orbits, all of that is done over the African space here in SANSA. So it's not like we sitting on the side and watching. We're actually part and parcel of the global space value chain. So we just need to find ways of actually increasing that across the African continent. Thanks.
That's awesome. We've had a couple questions kind of more getting into the geopolitical aspects of the whole conversation. Dr. Mansumi, do you want to kind of talk about the geopolitical and strategic implications of space development more from an African perspective?
Yeah, it's probably one of my pet topics as well. I think Judd would probably resonate with me as well on this one. So, obviously when you look at global security, there's a big issue globally, not just in Africa. So if you take it from a governance perspective, if we're sitting around the negotiation table, there's probably 3 or 4 different elements in terms of what you bring to the table. The one is where we're looking at sovereignty boosting. So countries want to push their sovereign rights or interest. The second is, if you look at Africa, I think there's only 2 countries that have never been colonized in Africa. So you look at things like neo-colonialism. So as much as there's decolonization, but there's still a strong relationship with those countries that actually colonized you in the first place. And I'm not going to name names, but when things need to move forward, you need to consult, okay? And that holds you back. The third one, which I think is kind of a plus and a negative, is your liberalization. In Africa, we segmented across 5 RECs, regional economic communities. And in SADC, for example, there's quite a strong push for trade liberalization, okay? So that's good in a sense, but it can also fragment you when different regions start to work against each other. And I think the last one, sorry, it just slipped my mind. It's the liberalization issue that I was talking about. So when you come to, it's the failed state, which I think where Judd will come in as well. There's many countries, not only in Africa, but there's quite a few countries where there's very weak governance systems and crime becomes a big issue. And this is where terrorist activity sort of kind of anchors itself as well, because you have a weak governance system. And this is where security issues need to be tackled. And I think the African Union is trying, but I think it needs a global effort, not just in Africa, but across the world. But how we tackle it, I think from an African perspective, we have to tackle it from the inside out rather than from the outside in. And this is where we need to create the capacity from an African perspective to deal with these kind of tensions. And as I indicated in my presentation, peace and security accounts for 60% of the budget of the African Union, purely from that perspective. So we have to crack those problems from a governance perspective. So we've started to work on the governance framework, and you probably have heard there's an African Space Agency that's coming through. But even there, I want to even caution it's not a top-down approach where one agency is looking at a continental program. We've also advocated in the policy a bottom-up approach where you bootstrap on the capabilities of national space programs and that collectively converge towards an African space program. So it's top-down, bottom-up as well. And in fact, years ago, we tried to set up a committee of African space institutions, agencies like SANSA working together with NALSTA and so on, and identifying flagship projects that we can come together and work on from the bottom up in terms of what we already have in the pipeline. And I think this is also an area of collaboration where we look internationally. How do we cement and strengthen those collaborative initiatives? And I think there's a whole, so as I said, this is a loaded topic, which I think is going to probably take us a few days to unravel, but I'm glad that this is happening. Thanks.
Before we get into some more civil conversations, I want to pass it over to Judd because we've had some questions about partnerships between African countries and more security agencies within the US, like DoD and whatnot. Do you want to kind of talk about ways that can be facilitated?
Yeah, sure. Let me just build on Val's comments, which I think were 100% right, that Africans have an opportunity here to set the terms of the debate. And actually, this isn't a very space-specific point. This is also a point when it comes to 5G, when it comes to infrastructure. And I know that South Africa tends to be probably the most vocal, but I would argue that other countries are not agenda setters, they're agenda takers. And the best thing that African governments can be doing right now at the sort of the regional, the super regional, and then at the national level is to write the legislation, to just set the terms, I think very consistent with Artemis, about what are the standards and transparency that they want from their international partners. And I think that's how you lower the temperature around geopolitical competition and you get good outcomes for everyone. So I just want to, foot stomp what Val said, because it's 100% the right way to do this, as opposed to sort of let the international community set the terms of the debate, which are going to be about geopolitical competition. And obviously, I indicated at the beginning, I do have my concerns about China and Russia. But I think if Africans define the terms of the debate, I think my trepidation and apprehension would reduce and diminish. On partnerships, we are seeing some engagement. In fact, in January, DOD, the Secretary of the Air Force, met with her Nigerian counterpart, or with the Nigerian military's program, to talk about engagement. So I think that we're starting to get at the beginning of this, and maybe this is a great opportunity to make sure that I get back to what Mike said when I said some people in the US government see this foolish. And he is right that no one at NASA would see this as foolish. And this is a really important point, Tyler. We have a very fragmented policy community, right? So we have people who really understand space, right, at NASA, and understand sort of its holistic value. And then you've got the folks in DoD who probably think of it more in terms of competitiveness and security. And then you've got the general Africa policymakers who are the most likely to see this as a lower priority. Maybe not foolish, but it's something not worthy of time. And what we really need to do, just as Val said about bringing Africans together around shared views, I think there's a lot more that we could be doing, bringing together the American system, private and public sector, to sort of help educate the various agencies, provide perspectives, because until then, I think we're going to have people working at different speeds. And that's not very productive. You don't want to see DoD in the lead on this. You don't want to see, state dragging its feet. You want NASA involved in it too. So I really think that this is an opportunity, and hopefully this event and the event that we're doing at CSIS next week can be a Kickstarter to see how do we get an interagency and then public-private sector view so that we can educate the people who don't know about space in Africa, and we can let the experts sort of lead, particularly from NASA, about the holistic value, and of course, highlight African voices as well in that conversation. So I don't know if I answered all of the question that you provided, but these are some really important points that I wanted to make sure we got through before the end of our session.
Sure, yeah. Timmy, I have a question for you, but I was wondering if you wanted to respond to anything that's been said so far before I...
Yeah, I did. Yes, I did. Oh my God, so much to say about geopolitics. But the big thing that I want to come to from what Val said was really, I love this article that you wrote with Tim Ifyong about the African Space Policy Institute. And I wondered what your thinking was around that, because, for instance, the people that I talk to say that the US, if they want to collaborate with Africa, they shouldn't go the security route, because that's really like you say, 60% of the budget in African Union is based on security, and it's really competitive because the individual countries will be like, pick me, pick me, pick me. And so we have to choose areas where there's less competition. And because the lens on space is fewer, you may be able to get those quick wins with the people that are particularly interested. But I think you have the different tiers in Africa, the countries who really get space, the ones in the middle who are emerging, like you say, and the ones in the bottom that would be like, what are you going to give me? Because they don't think space is relevant to them. So I really see this whole idea of an African Space Policy Institute, and it's something that I'm really looking at with my partners to be like, we need to get this thing off the ground. Like, what are some of your thoughts on that? Like, since you wrote that article.
It's coincidental, by the way. Etam was studying at the George Washington Space Policy Institute, and he interned with me in South Africa. And we actually co-authored 2 papers. One was the African space policy. The second was why African Space Agency shouldn't follow the European model in terms of the dichotomy between the European Commission and ESA, which are, there's a tension there between the political and the technical arm. But just on the African Space Policy Institute, you've got the George Washington Space Policy Institute, you've got the European Space Policy Institute. So we thought that in the same framing in terms of think tank, in terms of what the key issues on the African landscape, we should actually move towards setting up an African Space Policy Institute. And in fact, a few years ago, we put that on the table, but guess what? The politics overran that conversation. And I'm not going to mention names of countries, but they wanted to pull that towards their end. And that kind of killed the conversation to some extent. But I think more lately, we think that it's becoming even more important to revisit that topic, given the growth that's happening on the African continent. And as I said, one of the key aspects of the African space policy is for Africa to set its own agenda. And so obviously the policy framing becomes very critical and key in terms of how you take this entire continent forward from an African space program point of view. So if you're keen, we can have a conversation offline and see how we move that goalpost. Thanks.
Definitely. And I think it's probably not the role of government to do that. It might be a nonprofit actor, it might be, and, I'm coalescing the leading people, kind of like me, young people who are all over the place that really care about this topic. And I think something like that is not political, because I think once the politics gets into it, it just kills everything. And so, people who are not politically orientated, and then again, having that youth baseline. I mean, I know I'm screaming the whole youth angle, but that's where I really see, I see the dynamism happening. Thank you.
Yeah, just a last point. There's a youth bulge in Africa. The majority of citizens in Africa are above 35, below 35 years of age. So how do you capitalize on that capacity that you have? So you want to introduce, sort of innovative programs that they can be absorbed into, but also a fresh line of thinking in terms of where does Africa head? And that takes a collective effort, even from the youth perspective. Thanks.
Well, and if I could just add, Val, it's really where the world heads as well. And I want to compliment you both on the focus on policy, because we are at an inflection point. These exploration activities are occurring on the moon, even on Mars, and the world will have to decide, are we going to be working together and cooperating, or is it going to be conflict? Are we going to be transparent, or are we going to be opaque? And again, obviously from a parochial view of the United States, we see China not embracing transparency, certainly as much as anyone would like. And we hope that with the Artemis Accords, other activities, we're trying to walk the walk and talk the talk to show what responsible activities look like, to be transparent, full and public release of scientific information. Africa will have a critical role to play in UN COCOAS, and maybe a deciding force in this as to which direction things go in, because particularly within the UN system, Africa has a very strong voice, and an intentional and a strategic look at the policies and what kind of future we want to have in space is going to be so welcome.
That's really awesome. So we're trying to wrap up around 12. So we've got 15 minutes left. So I thought we'd ask one final question that all the panelists will get to answer. And so hopefully we'll get a really nice finishing conversation on this. So I'm wondering, what are the actionable plans going forward? What can we do to increase this cooperation? Like we've talked about how we should be cooperating, we should be embracing all these different aspects, but what concretely can we do moving forward?
So I don't mind starting. One of the things so the people that I'm talking to, and the young people, things like that in Africa, in Nigeria, one of the things that we're saying, and one of the things that really irritates me, is when we talk about leapfrogging. Yes, you want to leapfrog, and the example of the mobile phone is really great. We leapfrogged, we didn't have landlines, we went straight to GSM, and we did all that. But space is a long-term play. It's not about, yes, you want some quick wins. Like I said, with the Rwandans, they're focusing on agriculture because you can get in there, you can do some stuff really quick. But space is not a long-term game, and it's not something that you're like, oh, okay, we've shown development. So you've got to have ambitious projects that people can work towards. And if it weeds some people out, especially in countries like Nigeria, South Africa, the ones that have been there for a long time, so be it. Like, it's okay that not everyone is there in the beginning, because we need to build up a critical mass. And that means you need to get the really serious people. So like in the Nigerian context, because we have a lot of politics, like you said, there's corruption, there's all these things. Some people get in there that shouldn't. So you're a senator's child, so you get to, go on this special training, even though you're not really interested in space. We have all these political issues. And I think some of those need to be weeded out. So it's really the serious people. And so that means I'm all up for hard challenges. I'm all up for having some really hardcore technical, issues to work on. So for instance, that RFI that I'm working on right now for NASA, I'm really talking about, yes, we should have quick wins, and yes, we should have, easy things to work on, but let's have some challenging stuff. It's okay if it weeds people out. You get the best, the best of the best, even if it's only a couple of people left. And so my thing is, for those aspirational people, so in the Nigerian Space Agency, I think we have close to like 200 or 300 PhDs, which is more than the average university in Nigeria. And so we need some tough stuff to work on. And then if that weeds people out, so be it. So like, I'm all for the big challenges, even if we only have a couple of people working on them, let them show what they can do and work with that. So that's my controversial thought.
Yeah, you were mentioning earlier that there were things you need to have these things to aspire to in order to keep the people there to prevent the brain drain. And I think that's a perfect way to go about it, have those really high targets for these different projects. Mike, do you want to go next?
Certainly. And let me go high and then go a little bit lower. I think Africa needs to be a part of Artemis, that as humanity goes to the moon and then on to Mars, Africa must be a part of that to the benefit of all. And then getting back to your other question, astronautics. Again, there's nothing that grabs the attention and captures the imagination publicly like astronauts, and having that role model, having that path. During Apollo, it inspired generation of engineers, of STEM professionals in the US. And again, to the extent we can achieve that in Africa, we absolutely should. And then looking more at the business side, which I think is sustainable. And we talked a little bit about the, donor taker, relationship, et cetera. This is where business is so exciting, that our company is not working with Africa for the sake of Africa. We're working with African companies because they bring great value to us. They help us make money. They create business. And I think we should be taking specific actions to break down barriers that allow that virtuous circle with business to continue. And there I have to mention export control, that the US needs to take a look at its export control policies. We've made some progress in the past. We need to continue to do more to ensure that the US, African countries and companies can work together effectively, particularly in the business sector, where then you're going to have youth be attracted to these companies and these opportunities, the small sat revolution, the CubeSat revolution in space manufacturing, that will allow us to have sustainable growth in the future. So paying attention to whether it's export control or other barriers that prevent us from working together is something that we need to focus on as US policy to the benefit of all.
Yeah, I love that you mentioned the Artemis Accords. I'm very excited to see where all that goes, you know, see who becomes a partner, what do they get to do. I guess I want to jump back real quick. We can go on with our final question. Timmy, do you want to talk about the Artemis Accords real quick? Because I want to know kind of what can the African countries bring to the Artemis Accords? What are their key points?
So what's really interesting, I think, from when the strategy, the way the rollout of the Artemis Accords came out was super interesting, because first, of course, it was just the outline. And I think that was a great way to kind of gauge interest, because, you know, the international community, the first thing they did was really jump on it and be like, oh my God, this is American domination and like all this kind of stuff. And then we saw as the rollout came, that it's okay, this is based on, you know, the Outer Space Treaty. It's also being negotiated. So that means maybe the US would have wanted more than they got, but like, because it's a negotiated outcome, it kind of comes to the middle a little bit more. And like, you know, many provisions in there, Article 10, for instance, you know, really mentioned that, you know, Copeworth was going to be the place we were going to talk about resources and things like that. So I think for African countries, my big thing is I'm not really clear on what African positions are on certain topics. And I don't know who is that voice for the African view. So for instance, I'm on the International Institute of Space Law Working Group on Space Traffic Management, and I'm supposed to be writing the Africa section. And I recently partnered with the Nigerian Space Agency, and together we're trying to be like, okay, this is what Nigeria's views are. Nigeria is thinking about space traffic management system. When I talk to the Rwandans, they're like, maybe no one's really thinking about this because African countries don't have that many assets in space. There's only 41 satellites, so space traffic management is not important. But over time, as we see what's happening with mega constellations and all that, it's gonna be important to know, what does Africa think as a bloc? Because individual countries, yes, I can get the Rwandans to come on board and the Nigerians to come on board and come up with a position, but it needs to be an African position, because it's as a bloc that we're going to make some impact. So I think those provisions in the Artemis Accords, you know, the controversial areas in there, you know, deconfliction of activities and safety zones and things like that. What does Africa think about the connection between property rights and kind of safety zones? Like, if you have a safety zone and you have a keep out zone, does it mean that you're basically appropriating that area? You know, what does Africa think about this? You know, and so for me, I'm kind of pushing to try and understand, and maybe Val can speak to this. I know the working group for the African Union, you know, would have been that kind of voice that's speaking for Africa, but like, who comes up with African positions on things? That's my big question.
Stella, you want me to come in on this one?
Sure, yeah.
So maybe I kind of stepped down as the chair of the African Union Space Working Group 3 years ago, when the politics started to get too heavy. I'm not a politician, I'm a policy person, but I'm not a politician. And I think this is probably the departure point, is if you take the politics out of the equation, you know, the diversity we get is an asset in terms of our different experiences, our different cultures coming together. It's just sometimes the politics just hampers us and puts a stumbling block, and that's essentially the end of some of these conversations. I mean, if you take the Artemis Agreement, some countries wouldn't even look at it because it's US driven, and that's unfortunate. So it's that kind of mindsets that we're dealing with. But I think what we need to do is to be mindful of where the world is going to, and you know, how do we engage our youth in terms of what that world looks like? I mean, just to give you a sense, I only had access to a smartphone in my late 40s. My little one has been playing with a smartphone since a year or two. You know, she understands how this works. I got to get used to it in my 40s. And so, in terms of the trajectory and understanding, the youth is probably going to overtake us in terms of where we think we're landing in a few years or a decade from now. And I think if you come back to the African continent, I think, Mike, you were talking about, lunar resources and, landing on the moon and so on. For example, in South Africa, we've got a big mining community, gold, diamond. The biggest platinum reserve is between us and Zimbabwe. We're looking at fuel cells. But there's a whole suite of regulations around the mining sector. Can you pull that out and see how that can be relevant to outer space? We also have a base in Antarctica. There's an Antarctic Treaty. How do you deal with those kind of issues in Antarctica? So can we pull from the non-space sector into informing how we shape the space sector? And I think those are useful learnings that can come out from there. And also 4IR, the fourth industrial revolution. How do we pull that into the agenda? Where does Africa play? It's not just about, duplicating what's happening elsewhere in the world, but how do we take our own social context and understanding and come up with new kind of innovations? And Timiebi will probably know, in Kenya, we had the PESA, which is a new banking, online mobile banking, because there's no banks in many African countries. So they had to come up with an innovative solution. How do people bank with each other? So those are the kinds of things we could see new advances in terms of innovation from an African perspective, which might not be anywhere else in the world. So I think there's a lot of potential in terms of what we can do going forward.
And Val, I totally hear you. I often have to go to my 13-year-old son for both my phone and my computer to help me figure. He helped me even do this Zoom. And apologies for jumping in, but if I can say just a quick couple of words about the Accords. Per your point, Val, there's a perception, which I believe is a misperception, that the Accords are, this is the U.S. position and we're enforced on anyone. Having gone through the Accords negotiation where I lost most of my hair, that was not only 8 different space agencies, but 8 different foreign ministries going through every single word of the Accords. And the text of the Accords belongs as much to every one of the international partners as it does to the US. If you look at the US position, particularly at the time with the executive order on space resources, et cetera, the Accords represent a completely different point of view, or at least one that represents common ground. This is what every country can agree upon. And one of the reasons we are so excited to have Australia as a member of the Accords is they're a moon agreement country. And what the Accords represent is not the US position per se. Obviously, the US supports the principles of the Accords, but it represents a common ground as to where a country like the US that's opposed to the moon agreement and a country like Australia that signed the moon agreement, what is it that we can all agree upon? And particularly when it comes to deconfliction of activities, space resources, I just want to make sure there's no confusion there. That deconfliction of activities in the Accords, that was about preventing harmful interference in the Outer Space Treaty. Well, how do you do that? We came up with a concept of safety zone, which was actually based on the Hague International Space Resources Governance Working Group, where you have to inform the United Nations where you are and what you're doing, the Secretary General and publicly, and you have to coordinate with any party that enters that zone to create safety. In no way an exclusionary zone or designed to keep anyone out. That would be a violation of the Outer Space Treaty. Just informing where you are publicly, what you're doing, and coordinating with other parties to avoid harmful interference. And that was the best way we could find to support avoiding harmful interference. And that's what the Accords are, a beginning of a discussion to try and implement on the actual surface of the moon the requirements of the Outer Space Treaty. And then on space resources, you're absolutely right. And the Coast Guard does a great job relative to what the regulations should be for preventing forward and backward biological contamination. That's again another area where we'd like to see China be more transparent. I believe they're following COSPAR when it comes to Mars, et cetera, but we haven't seen it. So this is where we need to see these transparencies to the benefit of all. And relative to resources on the Accord, since COSPAR had done a good job with that, all that we said is that you can extract and you can utilize, and all such operations should be conducted in full compliance with the Outer Space Treaty. There's a lot more to discuss there relative to sharing regimes, et cetera, and moon agreement countries and the US and others might have different views. that's a conversation for UN COPUOS and others. Again, the Accords were just trying to find that common ground to establish baselines for transparency, for safety, and for peaceful exploration and commercial use.
Judd, do you want to give any thoughts about the Artemis Accords and maybe provide your final actionable goals?
Yeah, let me just sort of summarize what I think are some of the key ways forward for the U.S.-Africa space engagement. And this will certainly build on what Mike and Val and Timmy have said. But first is U.S. interagency coordination is, I think, lacking. And this is something that I think the Biden administration should take up. I think that space is particularly a very attractive industry for our private sector, and we should think about the Prosper Africa initiative. This is one of the sectors that we really consider and give more attention to. If we can't get our own house in order, we're not going to be able to effectively engage with our African partners. Number two is around multilateral and bilateral engagement. In 2008, China set up this Africa, excuse me, those are just always at the tip of my tongue. The Asia Pacific Space Cooperation Organization based in Beijing. So they're in the lead in terms of working with global partners on a space policy, at least with a format here. I think we could be doing a very similar thing to work with a broad array of partners, and not just Europeans, but Brazil has is engaged in Africa in terms of space programming. There's a lot of different actors. I 100% agree with Timmy. We need to privilege serious countries around this issue and elevate them. And then, as I said earlier, we really need to press Africans to identify what they want from their foreign partners. They should be in the driver's seat. They need to be agenda setters. Finally, we touched on this, but I'm a big proponent of, and it sounds like everyone on the panel is as well, cultural diplomacy. How do we use space to talk about shared partnership, where our imagination can take us, uplifting excellence. This week I saw that Russia is doing a engagement at the National Museum in Lusaka about Sputnik. Now, it's not that the U.S. hasn't done that in the past either, but just to give you a sense that this is still an idea that resonates with people. The U.S. had a great opportunity and exploited it, or capitalized on it, I should say, after the Hidden Figures film. And a number of the embassies in Africa were talking about that movie and talking about the role of African Americans in the space program. And I think we're in a great place now under President Biden to talk more and to show our diversity, as Mike talked about. And lastly, the arts. There is really interesting stuff happening in sci-fi on the African continent, and what can we be doing to engaging it, promoting it? That's how we are going to inspire people. So those would be my three sort of broad brush things that we should be doing.
Awesome. Val, do you have any final comments before I wrap this up?
Now, Tyler, from my end, I think I'm quite excited about the conversation. I'm just hoping that it could give impetus to something even greater, maybe a follow-on conversation, or even start to put some actions in place. And looking forward to that. Thank you.
Okay. Well, thank you everyone for being here today. I'm sorry if I couldn't get to your question. We just had a lot of really awesome conversations. Make sure to check out the CSIS event next week to maybe continue this conversation. And if you didn't get a question answered, maybe head over there. Maybe they can answer the question over there. So with that, I would just like to say thank you. Thank you to the SPI. Thank you to all our panelists, and have a great day.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Tyler. Thanks, everyone.
Yep. Bye.
Thank you, Tyler. Thank you.